We had our recordings in progress. We had our catch-up one from last week, so we had a bit of a chat about clinical trials yesterday. It's just nice to be back after the summer, and I think clinical trials is something that's you know, they were kind of on pause for a few months because of the pandemic, but they are now back. We've been getting a lot of questions about the trials that are upcoming, so I think this is a great opportunity to basically hear from parents who have been through clinical trials with the children and can talk about their experiences. Andy's obviously also here as both a parent and a clinical trial coordinator for reverse Rett. So he spoke yesterday about the kind of logistics of taking part and how reverse Rett supports families in participating in clinical trials. But we can revisit those ideas if people have questions about that. And I'm sure that will come up through what our panelists are going to talk about. And also Andy and I both have had children on clinical trials as well. So we've got the kind of double perspective from work and having our children on there. Before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. I'm supposed to emphasize that our lovely panelists, who are, by the way, Zilla, Jane and Melise, they are not clinical or medical experts. We are not giving you clinical advice. They're just sharing their experiences with their children. Please bear that in mind.
They are experts, though. They're definitely experts.
They are experts. They're not medical experts. I have to say that. But you are experts. I have to remind you that these sessions are being brought to you via the Rett Connect initiative, which has philanthropic support from the Pears Foundation. Please do feel free to raise your hand either virtually or literally during the session if you have a question, or you can put a question into the chat box and we will put those to the panelists at the end. Please try to stay muted during the session unless you're talking, just so we minimize the background noise. And please be aware that we are recording and this will be shared, the link will be shared to other registered attendees and then eventually put onto YouTube. So if you don't want to be seen, please feel free to turn your camera off, although it's nice if you leave it on so that we can actually see each other. I'm going to hand over to the panelists who are just going to introduce themselves to start with briefly and let you know who they are, who their daughter is, maybe where you are in the country and which trial your child has taken part in. And then we're going to kind of move through the process chronologically, going around panelists one at a time and see where that takes us. So I will go straight to Jane for an intro. We can't hear you, Jane. You're on mute.
Can you tell I've not had a lot of practice at this? My name is Jane and I am mum to Emily, who is just about to be 24, nearly 24. We live in the East Riding of Yorkshire and we took part in the Cerizatan trial.
Great, thank you, Jane. Zilla?
Yeah, hi, my name's Zilla and I'm mum to Hannah, who's 30. We live in Dorset and Hannah was part of the Cerizatan trial at King's College in London.
Great. Elise?
Hi, I'm Melise. My daughter's Kaylin and she's 14. We live in Crewe in Cheshire and we took part in the Cerizatan trial at King's College as well.
Great. And before we proceed, I don't know whether, Andy, you mentioned yesterday, just to make other parents aware that obviously all the experience that we're talking about today comes from the Cerizatan trial, which is a bit different to other trials. Do you want to just say a few words about that so that everyone knows?
Oh, is that me?
Yeah.
I just zoomed out then. Yeah, well, I haven't got much voice left after all the waffling on that I did yesterday, but we also took part in the Cerizatan trial with Amber, who's 20, 26 tomorrow. And I also did the recruiting for the trial and spoke to the families and looked after them, you know, what they needed throughout the trial. And it was a real pleasure to have Amber number 1, Jane number 2, Emily number 2, and Hannah number 3. And then Kaylin came a little bit later. So although we haven't met in person, other than Melise, who I've met plenty of times, it's really nice to have you all on and to reminisce about the trial that made such a difference, but ultimately didn't end in the way that we hoped, which is unfortunately what happens with a lot of clinical trials, whatever the disease. But we all learned a lot. We learned a lot from Professor Santosh and his team, and I think everyone will agree that it was great to get our children in front of him and to get his expertise and that of the team who do a brilliant job at the Rett Centre. So yeah, we're going to be mainly talking about that trial, obviously, because we've been involved. The parent panel have only been involved in that trial so far. But I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the trials that are either upcoming or happening now.
Okay, great. I was just going to add what you said yesterday, just to make other parents aware that this is all of this experience comes from the Sarazotan trial, which was involved overnights and kind of lengthier stays, but that doesn't mean that every other clinical trial has the same kind of protocol. Yeah. So it's worth bearing that in mind. I think we'll come back to maybe the other trials at the end. But just bear that in mind as our panelists are talking, that it doesn't necessarily mean that every trial will work in the same way, because they're all quite different. So
it's a very good point, that, Beth. I should have said that, because it was a very, very difficult trial right from the beginning to take part in, and there were a lot of overnight stays. And if you have other children, or your daughter or son has multiple needs and needs equipment and things like that, it was quite a difficult trial to organise as a family. But the trials that have come since then have been much, much easier.
Okay, so if we can we're kind of going to break down the whole process of clinical trials into sections, and then go around all our panelists to talk about that kind of particular area, rather than you telling your whole story in one go and then take it in turns. So if we could start with kind of, the beginning of the process, decision making, when did you first become aware of a clinical trial which you thought might be suitable for your daughter? What was that decision making process like? Who was involved? Who did you speak to? What support did you get? And what ultimately made you decide to go for it? Did you have any doubts or hesitation? So just that initial stage and of the process. Anyone particularly want to start, or should I just nominate someone? Go for it, Jane. Let's come back to you.
I sense a theme developing here. We found out about the trial a little bit accidentally. We booked a session to meet Susan Norwell for a one-to-one session with Emily, and at that trial, the lady who was very kindly letting us use her home as the base for it dropped it into conversation, and we immediately went away and found out a bit more from Andy and the gang. And it turned out we were in at the very start, which we didn't know at the time. It felt a little bit almost as though we were rushing to make sure we didn't miss out on the opportunity. In terms of the decision making, that was Emily. She knew from the get-go that she wanted to try and do something to try and fix this one particular part of her presentation that is such a huge part of her life and has such a massive impact on her life. And she was in as soon as she heard about it. We do think Emily has the ability to weigh the pros and cons, but I also think she was heavily emotionally invested in wanting to do it. I'm not sure that she was massively objective in the decision making, but we did get as much information as we could. And the initial visit down to London was really helpful in really sort of giving us the broad idea of what would be involved, and it was certainly not inconsiderable what it would mean for us, which probably will come into further questions just because of how far away we live. But yeah, the decision was ultimately Emily's, and the only factor that for us would have been whether it logistically was just impossible to do. And it wasn't impossible to do, it was just really difficult. We had no idea at the time that we would be doing it for 3 years plus. We expected we were signing up for, we did expect nearly a year, because our big hope was to try and capitalise on the possibility of being able to remain on a medication that might be helpful at the end. So we were in it for the long haul, but we just didn't know how long that haul was. Whether it would have changed our decision making, I can't say. I don't think it would, because Emily was so on board. And in terms of the worries and concerns, the one thing I would say is I think Sarizitan is perhaps a slightly different drug in that it was already a licensed medication for another condition. And while that doesn't give any guarantees, it does mean that it had already gone through a huge amount of safety assessment, and we knew we were taking something that had not caused significant harm to an awful lot of people. We were not going in to completely blind to a new drug, so that did allay a lot of our fears in the first place.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I love that Emily was so involved in that decision-making process. I mean, I could go off on a massive tangent and talk to you about how how she was involved and how you communicated all of the pros and cons to her and all of that, but that may be a different session, I think. But that's really good to know that she was so invested in having that. Zilla, you were obviously number 1 on the trial. So, well, sorry, number 2.
Number 3. We were number 3.
Oh, okay. So when Amber,
I think Emily was number 2.
Amber
wasn't
was
she?
2. Okay, Amber.
Yeah,
Emily,
we were number 3. I can't remember how I heard of the trial, but I can remember a conversation I had with Rachel from Reverse Rett, and whether it was where it was advertised, I don't know, but that seems a long time ago to me. But anyway, I had a conversation with Rachel, and she told me all about the trial and what was required of Hannah. It was something that I'd waited for. Well, Hannah was 27, I think. Was it 3 years ago, the trial? So Hannah
started in 2017, so
yeah. So Hannah would have been
ago,
Hannah would have been 26, 27, and it was a conversation I'd waited for 26, 27 years. Something positive could come out of it to help Hannah, and her breath holding was a major concern, which triggered a lot of seizures, which was another major concern. And I thought, we've got to go for it. We did discuss it with Hannah. She uses an eye gaze. Obviously, she's got limited understanding of a clinical trial. And we went for our first appointment with Dr. Santosh, and we were sold. He was amazing, and all the work that had been done to set the trial up, you could see from the team. And again, meeting Dr. Santosh was something we'd waited 27 years for, somebody that understood our girls and could answer our questions, and looked at them holistically. That was the big thing. And I knew from that first appointment that whatever, the worst thing for Hannah was going to be having to have the blood tests. And apart from that, I thought she's going to like this because the focus would be on Hannah for the morning. And I knew that they would keep Hannah safe. I didn't feel that Hannah would be put at risk at any point. And I knew that at any point that she could come off the trial as quick as she went on the trial. And for me, she had these, what we classed as her MOT, where we knew that she was healthy, her bloods were okay, her gases were okay, which again, we'd not had. So for me, it was a very positive decision to make. and the logistics of it were slightly different. I didn't have younger children at home, so the travelling wasn't an issue for us. Slightly more probably for Hannah. She doesn't really want to sit in cars and taxis for a long time, but you know, that was, we made do. We yeah, so it was a very, very positive decision to make.
That's very good. Did you have any doubts at the start, or worries?
No, I'm quite optimistic, and I thought I'll try anything to help Hannah, as we will, all of us, for our girls. And I just thought, if nothing comes out of it, then I've tried. If I don't try, nothing's going to come out of it. And of course, for the time that she was on the trial, it was a hugely positive experience for Hannah. So yeah, there weren't any doubts really. Not after speaking to Rachel. Rachel's very positive about it. And like I say, meeting the team in King's, Michael and I both went up on that appointment. That's her dad. And when we came away and said, gosh, this is amazing. This is really going to open Hannah's life up. So there was no doubt.
That's fantastic. That's very, very good to hear. Melise, your initial decision-making experience, any fears, any hesitations? How did you decide that this was the right thing for Kaylin?
Well, for us, it was after speaking to Rachel as well. That's how we found out about the trial, actually. I think it was through the Rett registry, in fact. Rachel contacted us at A to ask if we'd be interested. Straight away, I said, yes, of course, definitely. But then obviously you think, well, hang on, this is something unknown. But Rachel put that at ease, because obviously we were later in the trial, so it sounds a bit wrong. We knew there'd been lots of other girls on the trial before, so we knew they were fine and there had been no major adverse events or anything. So yeah, that helped for us, and to know that there was a chance that our breath holding and hyperventilating, like the whole breathing irregularities, were going to be sorted. That for us kind of made the decision, really. We thought there isn't a decision to be made, really. If it helps, fantastic. As Alice said, if it doesn't, then we've not lost anything. But yeah, for us, logistics wise, it was only me going with Kaylin down. Barry, my husband, he stayed here with the others. Yes, they are older, but one of our other daughters has learning difficulties, so it was just me and Kaylin going. So that was a little bit hard work, because I couldn't drive at the time, so it was trains for us down to London. Thankfully, it was pretty straightforward. Crewe to London is a main line, and it was made even better by Reverse Rett organising the train tickets, the hotel if we needed one for like the overnight stays, and also like sorting for like taxis, that we could get a taxi rather than having to try and sort that ourselves. So yeah, like for us, yes, it was a long, tiring day, but worth it. Yeah, we found so beneficial being on a trial. Like Zala said as well, like being under the team, like, and Kaylin getting her MOT. It was great knowing that she was being looked after, because things here weren't quite that great in terms of bloods getting done and things. Yes, it was difficult for bloods to get done because of a lack of visible veins, but they managed it every time. So yeah, for us it was highly positive. Yes, there was a lot involved in the logistics, but so much less pressure, because Reverse Rett sorted like as much as they could do, apart from sort of personally escorting us. They took all that pressure off. So yeah. As I say, after speaking to Rachel, there were no doubts. Obviously you start watching for any events yourself anyway, like just in case to report. And yeah, the team always kept in contact to make sure we were good. So yeah, I'd definitely do it again.
That's brilliant. That's really fantastic. I think we've kind of gone forward a bit into the logistics, which is obviously a major consideration when you're embarking on a trial.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's how this goes. And I think it's something that I think parents are often really concerned about. And it's something we touched on yesterday in yesterday's session. But I think it'd be good to hear from you guys about actually how you manage the logistics and how it was for not just you, but also your daughter, and how she coped with, obviously there's missed school, there's traveling, there's staying in a hotel potentially, all of the logistics, and also any impact on any other children at home. So Jane, if we come back to you, how was that kind of side of the trial for you, the practicalities of actually being involved?
I guess we had some pros and cons. One of the pros was that we have no other children, so we could focus entirely on what Emily needed without the logistics of taking care of other kids. One of the cons was that I think we might have been told that we lived the furthest away from the trial centre of all the participants, and I kind of see why perhaps there weren't any more of us. But for us, that meant it was a 4.5 hour solid drive down to London. And then if you have a stop and you have to find a changing place, because Emily is completely wheelchair dependent, requires hoisting. So we needed to find the right facilities on the way down. We got very good at it. But if you're looking at a 5.5 hour journey, there was no way we could do that, then travel across London to the trial on the same day and travel back. So every trip down was a 3-day trip for us. And we knew that going into it. And like I say, Emily was so fixed on really wanting to try this, and we wanted to make that happen for her. Most of the time, my husband, her dad, was able to fit it around his work, but he actually worked in the school that Emily was at the time, and his job was term time, and there was no taking time off during term time. So we thankfully had a friend who would step in. There was a good friend who came as an extra body, didn't particularly help to care for Emily, but could be the person who did all the running, and that made it manageable. But it was definitely a Emily +2 situation wherever we went. The actual practicalities of booking a hotel and arranging taxis, for us it was a 45-minute journey from our hotel to the hospital, simply because you try and find a hotel, and Andy will know, you try and find a hotel in London.
You're being generous there with the 45 minutes. We had some 1.5 hour, 2 hour journey to those appointments.
Indeed, it could be. There were some longer days, but yeah, there were hardly any places where we could find, would you believe, connecting rooms, one of which had a hoist, which was what we required. And I think it was down to 2, was it, Andy? 2 hotels that did it, and we used Premier in Archway the whole time.
Yeah, and the other hotel was constantly booked. You could never get in it. So it was basically just Archway. So we ended up with a great relationship with the people there because we knew them that well.
They were excellent. I couldn't praise them highly enough. They went to every length to make sure that we had a great stay. But the actual practicality of all those arrangements was completely taken sort of out of our hands, as Melissa's already said. We didn't have any of that to worry about, which was fantastic. We had a few little quirks working out what was the best way to actually book a taxi at the very beginning. But I think everyone was learning at that point, and once we'd got it figured out, it was great. So it was just a lot of time. And after the first time or two, really not that much stress, because you just knew that this is how it unfolds, and it all works itself out. And so mostly fairly pleasurable to say that, you know, we were on a train that just had to we got to go through those motions.
Wow, yeah, I mean that is a big undertaking. You've got to be committed to it to be prepared to do that kind of journey every time and have that time out of your life every time. And Emily found all of that fine, didn't face her?
She coped with it incredibly well. She was always very excited to get down to London. She had a really good relationship with the team and her favourites, of course, and she was very keen to get there. It got a little bit that once we'd been there half an hour, she was kind of ready to go home. We'd done everything that she wanted to do. She'd seen her friends, and this was all a little bit old. And of course, we never knew that we were going to be in it for quite as long as it turned out that we were. So I think it was starting to just the extent of it and the amount of time she had to spend sitting in a wheelchair traveling was starting to get a little bit old for her towards the end. But she was never reluctant to go. It was just not quite the excitement that it had been to start with for any of us, and that's nothing personal to anybody involved. They were all wonderful.
Yeah, the novelty wears off.
It does.
After all. Okay, great. Melise, you've talked a little bit about the logistics and getting down. You had a pretty long journey as well. Is there anything you wanted to add to that kind of process, that part of the process?
To be fair, compared to our journey actually wasn't that long. It's like an hour and a half on the train to Euston. But what we were doing at the starter trial, obviously, for the overnight stays as well, is yes, we stayed in the hotel the night before, before having to go to the facility. But what I found with being on my own, I was having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning at the hotel to get Kaelin all sorted and breakfasted before the taxi came at 7:45 to be at the facility for 9. We actually found it was easier to go down on the day for us. And what we do is we basically just get Barry would get Kaelin all sorted while I sorted all our other bits. So he'd get her dressed and things. Obviously it was an early start, yes, it was. But yeah, she'd go back to sleep in her wheelchair. I'd get on the train. Obviously, we had the passenger assist as well. So, they had the ramps and things. So that made that so much easier. And when she decided to wake up, I'd give her breakfast on the train. And it was much easier because then it was only about a half hour, 40 minutes from Euston for us in the taxi. Yes, it made it a long day, but it worked so much better for us than me struggling with all this luggage to go to the hotel to then have to take it to the facility if we were coming back that day. So yeah, on the whole, for us, it was actually easier as we went on. Kaelin didn't mind it one bit. She was happy. She had her iPad with her Peppa Pig and her Ben and Holly. She was happy wherever she was. And yeah, she liked seeing everybody, to be fair, at the centre as well. And yeah, again, some more than others. I don't think she was too happy with the blood draws, but hey, that's part of it. But yeah, logistics wise, for us, you would think, oh, I've got this really early start, this really long day, and by the time I get home, I'd be ready for bed at 8, which is unheard of for me. But yeah, for us, it wasn't a huge issue, to be honest. After we sort of decided that, yeah, no, we didn't need the hotel. But even at the hotel itself, actually, as Jane said, they were fantastic. Even when we had to get delivery of oxygen and things sent to there for when we were down for the 3 days, they were fantastic because that arrived before we did. So yeah, and they put it in storage, and nothing was too much trouble for them. So yeah, as I say, everybody sort of pulled to make it the least stressful experience it could be. So yeah, I was happy.
That's fantastic. I think when you were talking there about it actually being easier to kind of just get there and give her breakfast on the train, I was thinking that I haven't seen any of the other trial sites apart from King's, but something that surprised me and that made everything a lot easier is that it's such a nice facility. You've got a room where there's a kitchen and the sitting room, and then you're not like you're on a ward. I think if you're going to spend the whole day in a ward and then you really want to have fed her before you arrive and have done all those things. But because of where you're going to, that it's so nice, it's very, very quiet and calm, and you've got that sitting room option, etc. I think that does ease the pressure quite a lot, and Andy will be able to speak to the facilities at the other trial sites, but I think that's something that maybe parents in their head, I certainly had in my head, I was assuming, I'd pictured a normal hospital ward, and it's just not like that at all, and it does make it much more pleasant, I think.
Oh, definitely.
The trial site's
I've got to
similar.
say, you're saying that, Beth, and so are you, Melise, because you didn't see the initial place where they did the trial.
Yeah,
it was like it was a dungeon, and I think one of the things that worked well was the fact that Amber went first, which wasn't planned. In the beginning, we announced the trial, and and people expressed an interest, but when you actually went through the trial protocol and everything else, a lot of people just went, no, that's not for me. So we were struggling for patience in those early days, and Amber went first because we were ready for her to go, and Jane and Zilla quickly followed, and then there was quite a big gap. So I think the three of us definitely, for me, as trying to coordinate other people as well, it was definitely helpful to go first to find out all the pros and cons. I didn't get it right, quite often for other families, for sure, because it was so complicated. But we learned a lot very quickly, and so did the team at King's, because the first time we went, they didn't even realise that Amber was going to be needing a hoist, and we went to hoist her, and it wasn't charged, and there was some crazy things like that went on, and it was a little bit like a carry-on film at times. But as the trial went on, they got better, we understood what was involved better, and things like getting the drug from the pharmacy and everything else was speeded up, because there was a couple of times that I can remember when all Amber had all the tests done by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we didn't leave the hospital till 5 because we were purely waiting for the drug to come from pharmacy. And as the trial went on, they got a bit quicker with that. Zilla, how were you? I know you went to Brentford, so you went to a different hotel. I can still remember Ali, from who I used to talk to all the time, booking your room.
Yeah, we went to Brentford because we were going out of our way to go to the North hotel in the north. So we went Twickenham, and then we got a taxi in. The logistics for us, we didn't have any other children at home, any young children, and also because Hannah lives independent, she had a care team around her. So the first, I think it was 3 times, my husband and I went up with Hannah, but after that I went up with a carer, which made it much easier. And we used to travel up in the evening, so I used to drive up, so Hannah would have her supper, and Hannah's routine is that she has her supper, then she has the TV on in the evening. So for Hannah it wasn't that much difference because she has chill time anyway, and she was just in the car. It's about a 2.5-hour journey. Then we'd get to the hotel, and within an hour we were starting the bedtime routine. What she didn't like was being woken up at 6:30, because that, but then she enjoyed the big cooked breakfast that was put in front of her at 7:30. So that made up for the early start. And of course, because I had a carer, I could say, make sure you're ready by 7, and then you can take Hannah over. So that side of it was actually, the hotel was lovely. And then the taxi came, and like the others said, Reverse Rett organised all of that, so there was no stress. And then when we got to the trials, the other good thing with having a taxi is when the traffic was bad, they knew all the routes to get through the traffic, which I wouldn't have. We did drive once. We thought, oh, do we need this overnight stay? Let's do it there and back in a day. And it didn't work. It was too much. It was too long for Hannah to be sitting there and back and then sitting at the trial centre. And it didn't work for any of us. So we went back to staying.
We tried the same. We tried it once and never again. It was horrendous.
No. But when we asked to try that, the trial centre were really good, the team. They said, of course, have an appointment time that suits you. So they were very accommodating. And The worst bit in the big early days was waiting, like you said, Andy, waiting for those drugs. Because Hannah, if we worked it out, if we could get out of the trial centre by 1, we were back in the hotel by 2, and we wouldn't get in the traffic. We'd be back in Dorset by about 5, and then all the traffic starts, doesn't it? Trying to get in and out of London, and of course you know that you finished the part of the trial that they need Hannah for, and it's 1 o'clock, and then it's 2 o'clock, and you're just waiting for those drugs. And then you know that 2 o'clock means you're going to be stuck in traffic. And all I wanted to do was get Hannah home so she could go for a walk or start her evening routine in her own house. So but they did get better. They did get better at that. And sometimes we only waited half an hour. But yeah, the actual logistics for us, that when we had to start 3 nights, that was quite difficult because Hannah has a waking night. And they had a nurse in the trial centre for Hannah, but because Hannah has BiPAP, she also needed a carer. So I took a carer. 3 of us had to go up because obviously I can't expect the carer to do night and day. So I had a carer to do the nights. We did the days, and then the carer had to go back to the hotel to sleep so she could then do the next night. So the logistics of that was quite difficult, but we got there. And it all worked out. So yeah, and that was the only real long haul, was the 3-day. Then we went, I think we did a 2-day, didn't we? A 2-night stay.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it was just the night before, which they weren't. And it, like anything we do with our girls, you get into a different routine, don't you? You do it once, you think, oh, that didn't work, or that did work, and then the next time you do it, you do it to suit Hannah, really. You know, we needed to make sure she was happy. And it worked for her, and put a cooked breakfast in front of Hannah at 8 o'clock, she was fine. She was set up for the day.
For those overnight visits, Rachel stayed in the hotel and I had Finley. Rachel stayed at the hospital and I had Finley at the hotel. I think he was 4 then. So that was a challenge, but he was really excited to go. The first morning we went into the hospital, and he was so excited to meet Santosh because we talk about him at home so much. He thought he was some sort of famous person, like he was a celebrity.
He is.
So he enjoyed that. We were going around London, going on the London Eye, and he was asking if we could go back and see Santosh again. It was so funny. I'm getting quite nostalgic listening to these stories.
Yeah, it was. I really. And we used to make it a little trip for Hannah, and because she doesn't live at home anymore, it was really nice for her to have mum and dad for 48 hours, for however long it was. She really enjoyed it, and to stay in a hotel. It's what you make of it, really, isn't it? The situation. And we took her on the London Eye once, and took her around London. We took her to one of the overnight stays. We took her to the Hyde Park Christmas festival, and she really enjoyed that, and just made the most of it, really. So
I was gonna say as well, I mean, anyone who watches and is worried about younger children and siblings, so we our daughter Hannah was on the trial briefly, and we most visits we actually took our 3 younger boys as well. So we went with, at the time, what they were 8, 7 and 2, which sounded like it was going to be an absolute nightmare, like this is going to be hideous. And actually it was just an adventure. They loved it. The team there at King's was so kind and accommodating, because they have that lounge area. The kids were able to, they just sat in there, they watched some telly, they did some drawing. Everyone was so nice to them. And then there's that huge big park right next door. So one of us would take them off and kick a football about, and we ended up staying until pretty much Hannah was ready to go to bed most nights, and then one of us would bring the boys back on the train and the other would stay the night with Hannah. But actually they loved it. It was an adventure. Hannah absolutely loved having all the attention and being kind of the center of attention in front of her brothers as well. It's like, this is my time and you can just sit there and wait for me for a change. And we were pretty anxious about doing that with 4 children, and it was absolutely fine. Really, really so much better than we'd hoped, mainly because I think because of the facility itself and because of how accommodating the team were. So I think that can be something that really might put people off, but if the facility is right, it's really fine. That was our experience anyway. Like you say, you make it an adventure, then it was exciting to them. They were fascinated by the vein viewer and all the equipment. It was exciting. So yeah, okay, so logistics we've covered. I'm just looking at the time and thinking we've got a way to go. So moving towards kind of the actual clinical processes and also the outcomes, I think, combined. So, how were the actual clinical processes for your daughter and obviously you? So I think we've talked a little bit about blood draws and the things that they actually have to go through physically, taking urine samples, etc. How did you find all this? How did your daughter find it? And then moving on to actually outcomes, was it worth it? Was it beneficial? How did the drug actually work for your daughter in retrospect? So I think we've touched on that for each of you, but we'll revisit in a bit more depth. Melise, I'm going to go for you this time, letting Jane off the hook.
Well, for us, Kaylin handled it all in her stride, totally. I mean, they were so good with the blood draws, even with the vein finder, it was hard to get Kaylin's veins. But there was one in particular, Noah, he got no problem every single time. I mean, Noah wasn't around one time, and it was, I can't remember her name, sorry, but it was someone else that had to do it. And yes, it took her a few goes. Kaylin wasn't the best pleased about that. But yeah, other than that, all the other tests, Kaylin just took in her stride, She wasn't upset at all. She was just happy that she had her iPad there to watch. She's like, yeah, just get on with it kind of thing. And yeah, so they were really good that way. And even the home, because obviously we had to do home sort of tests as well, the bioradio to submit data, download data to the team. She handled them fine. We had a few hiccups where, the battery wasn't charged or Kaylin managed to get sensors off, which happened regularly. But yeah, other than that, it was actually really easy to do. Once you had it all set up, it was easy to do. Even downloading the data. I mean, yes, I've got some technical knowledge, but I wouldn't think anybody would find it difficult as such once they'd been talked through how to do it. But the trial itself was fantastic for Kaylin. We knew that, obviously not officially, but we knew from seeing her that she was actually on the Sarazotin and not the placebo, because we saw the huge difference in her breathing. She had other added benefits as well apart from that, but obviously the trial itself was for breathing, and we saw a huge difference in that. And we were so glad when the end of the trial came, but we had the extension periods, and then that extended again. But obviously, as a lot of trials don't come to fruition, basically, we were gutted when they said that they basically weren't taking it further. It wasn't going to be, licensed for use with the breathing problems. But yeah, the trial itself, we were really happy with all the safety checks and everything as well that they were doing. Any minor change in things they look at and decide whether Kaylin needed to have a bit of break, which she did a few times, or because other medications could interact, when she had a chest infection, she had a bit of break from the trial because of the antibiotics that she was on. And the team were always on top of anything like that, which made me feel so much better, because, to be fair, Caelan's paediatrician and things wouldn't have thought of any of that, like any interactions and things. And that's why I'm so glad that we got to like be on the trial and now continue on with the centre, which obviously is a whole different topic. But so yeah, for us, hugely positive in every aspect.
That's brilliant. Okay.
I've just seen a question from Natalia
Yeah.
about why there was overnight stays. They just had some monitoring to do for the drug, so you had to stay and somebody would just see how everything was going and checks. The trials that we've had since, there's been none of that. There's been no wearable technology needed either. So I remember that thing that Melissa was just talking about. That was a nightmare. Having to log the sleep in, and oh God, I'll never forget it. Fortunately, it's unlikely to be needed. It's unlikely to be needed in other trials, hopefully.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to the Anavex trial at the end, I think, Natalia, just to give an update on that. But yeah, there's safety measures, the overnights. I think Professor Santosh is very, very, I mean, safety is his primary concern, isn't it? So he's very, very cautious. And the overnight monitoring is to ensure that there aren't any adverse reactions, basically, for several hours afterwards. Jane, over to you for kind of clinical processes and outcomes.
What we found was that any part of the clinical processes that Santosh's team were responsible for were a dream to be involved in. They were what really I think made them stand out was that they listened. They were they wanted to hear from parents what would and wouldn't work, and they were always willing to try and do things a different way if we said that we felt it might be. And I don't know sort of the level of detail that you want to go into, but urine collection for somebody who is not continent is a tricky one. And the information on the urine collection pads is very much that it can only be in situ for 30 minutes. Yeah. And they were very keen when we first went that, you know, this pad went in as soon as we got there. And I used to say, if this has got to be changed every 30 minutes, you might as well just wait until about 12 o'clock and let's put one in then, and then you'll get your sample. And they would, those little things. And I think that probably from what we experienced would roll over to other families, in that they were learning that parents really knew their children very well, and could facilitate this going better. And so they were so good at listening and at responding. Where it fell down, I think, clinical processes wise, was ophthalmology.
Terrible.
Yes,
terrible.
awful.
Yeah,
I've forgotten about that.
Still have nightmares about them.
Oh, it was terrible.
Yeah, they were just not geared up and not switched on. And to be honest, if I had to take an overall opinion of it, the feeling was that we were a bit of a nuisance.
Definitely.
And that was really off-putting. And I felt a little bit for whichever team member came over with us, because we often had somebody with us over there, because they obviously were mortified at the way that things were being handled, but just very insensitive. We've got this bit of kit that requires you to lie on a table. Well, I'm sorry, you have no hoist, and she couldn't lie on that table anyway. Well, then we can't do anything. And yet we still were going through the motions every time. And we did get towards the end where we were saying we won't do the ophthalmon because there'll be a gentleman there who will say, well, I can't see anything because she won't keep still. And we didn't want to put Emily through that. So actually we got to be that we said we won't go in the later ones. And they were very understanding of that. The team totally got that the end result would be exactly the same whether we went or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, ophthalmology, because it was out of the hands of Santosh's team, was such a different experience. So I think it probably just does show that the team that you get plays a big part in how well a trial runs. But in terms of Emily's response, we really weren't sure, wasn't she on the Cerizatan for the first 6 months? And then we hit the second stage where she definitely got the drug, and then we knew that she'd been on the placebo because there was suddenly a massive step change for Emily. And we had some bumps along the way. One of the amazing MOT benefits, as Zilla has mentioned, is that because this trial went on a lot longer and Emily's epilepsy was a little less controlled than we'd hoped and than it had been at the start of the trial, unrelated to the trial, she was tried on a new medication. And not long before we went down to London, she was switched over, and the blood tests there showed that her white cells and her sodium levels were in her boots, and really quite dangerously so. And we were able to act on that really quickly. And actually, the neurologist at home who put her on this medication had no plans to test her sodium levels or her white cells. And we might never have discovered that, or discovered it too late to be useful. So we had some real benefits to that. But the Cerizatan itself for Emily was definitely effective. We were just limited about being able to tweak the dose to what we thought would be perfect because of the protocols of the trial. And we were really looking forward to being able to sort of make free with the dose a little once the trial ended. And of course that wasn't to be. So we were rather devastated to learn that it was all over, and that there was no way of us still being able to make.
And how the pharma company involved, Neuron, handled it. It was just out of the blue. It was a massive, massive shock right at the start of lockdown. And we were devastated. And within an hour of it happening, I'll never forget this, because it just makes me realize, if I didn't know already, how driven Rachel is. Despite finding this out, she was emailing a company that has another compound in the States that they were going to trial for Rett syndrome. And they didn't, because Cerizatan came along first. So they sort of shelved the idea, and she tried to facilitate an introduction to that company and to Neuron to try and get something started again. And although that is still not been resolved, she's still pushing on that, which I just thought she'd break down in tears and, collapse when we found this out, but she didn't. But I've got to say, I mean, just listening to all of you, especially Zilla and Jane, I'm surprised with Rachel, then Jane, then Zilla taking the children to King's. I'm amazed that Santosh is still interested in helping us with Rett syndrome, because I'd imagine the three of you, well, I know Rachel for definite, you take micromanaging to another level. So it's fair play to him that he's still so invested in what we're doing.
But I mean, clearly,
accusation.
pretty amazing outcomes. So I know, Zilla, that you've spoken a bit about, what impact it had on Hannah. Did you want to say any more about, how the outcome was for you? Obviously, it's not got a great ending, this story, because the drug was withdrawn. But I think we should reassure parents who might be watching and thinking about a clinical trial that that's not the intention. That's not normally how it goes. We don't normally have a terribly sad ending. So yeah, Zilla, did you want to?
I mean, the outcome for Hannah was initially it was a decrease in breath holding, which evolved into a decrease in seizures, and her seizures almost halved. It went by 50%. Because as you know, I map Hannah's seizures, so I could see it really clearly what was happening. And of course, with the decrease in seizures, you've got a much healthier, happier Hannah. So that it was a really positive outcome for her. And I going back to what you said about us being micromanaged, Andy, I think that actually we worked really well with Dr. Santosh, and I think he was
very open to it, wasn't he?
I think he learned an awful lot about our girls through us as parents.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think he was really open to. And actually, when towards the end of the trial, we didn't used to see Dr. Santosh as much, and I really missed that, because I wanted his expertise as well as he wanted ours. So yeah, no, it was good. But Hannah, the only thing that was slightly difficult was the bioradio testing in the beginning, because that was whether she could even go on the trial. We were so excited about her going on it, and we had to wait those few days to know whether she'd almost passed the breath holding test. And we knew that if Hannah didn't pass the breath holding test, then nobody's going to be on this trial, because it was constant.
Yeah.
So that, and of course, with Hannah not living with us, I was relying on carers to get that right, and that was quite difficult. So I was constantly going over there, and because we had to map, didn't we, what she was doing throughout the day. So that was quite difficult, those first few days. But apart from that, when we were in the trial centre, the blood draw, I used to say, you actually can see Hannah's veins. They're not great, but they didn't need to have to see the finder. They didn't use that, the viewfinder. But I just used to say, right, get it done as quick as you can, and then it's over. And the EEG and all the rest of it, she didn't mind at all. She actually really quite enjoyed having the attention, and they were great. They spoke everything through with Hannah. They did it at Hannah's pace. If you put Hannah on a bed, she'll go to sleep. So we didn't want her to go to sleep. So Hannah used to sit in the chair and have everything done in that lovely comfy. It was a bit like a dentist chair to us, but Hannah didn't mind. And she just used to sit in the chair, and we used to take up her eye gaze and her little DVD players, but it's the eye gaze she used, but she didn't used to watch a film because she was quite interested in what was going on around her. So no, we didn't. And the urine sample, Hannah's actually toilet time, so she's continent, so we could catch urine really easily. So that again, I used to do it, wake her up in the hotel, collect the urine, and then we had it. So that was never a problem for Hannah. The ophthalmology was an absolute nightmare, and I think it was and Hannah used to get really, really anxious because they weren't the best people. They looked at us as if to say, well, do we really need to do this? And she had her eyes dilated, and you could see that was stinging. So in the end, I just said, look, that bit I want to buy out of. So we didn't used to have to go to that. And I think we went twice to give it the benefit of the doubt, and it wasn't working. And they were fine. They just said, okay, you don't need to do that. I know Hannah's eyes are fine. I didn't need to have them to tell us that. So, but there was the other thing that I thought was really good. When they then got younger girls on the trial, the Zarazotin went to 2 milligram. When we first went on the trial, it was 5 or 10 milligram. So for Hannah to have an increase, we had to increase it by 5 milligram. And then when the 2 milligram got introduced, we could introduce it by 2, which was fantastic. Hannah only ever got to 7 milligram, and that was absolutely fine for her. And what I didn't want was to increase it from 5 to 10 and things to go wrong. So it was great that there was a 2 milligram one. So yeah, no, very, very, very positive and great outcome for Hannah. And unfortunately, during lockdown, it all went very negatively when we had to finish it abruptly, which I thought wasn't good for us. To think how slowly we had to start this trial, for then to have to end it so abruptly, was just not great. And then Hannah's breath holding and seizures increased, and yeah, so the actual trial was a real positive for Hannah.
We learned a lot from the way they finished that trial, and we wouldn't accept that again.
No.
It was our first trial and our first real interaction with pharmaceutical companies, and we were a little bit green and didn't know a huge amount, but we know a lot more now. And unfortunately, the CBD trial that followed this trial, it only ever got started at Alder Hey in Liverpool, and they had 5 patients on it, and then lockdown came and the whole thing was paused, other than the patients who were still on it. And then because of the pandemic carrying on and on and on, they decided to end the trial. Now, the patients that were still on the drug are still on the drug today. And I speak to 2 of them quite often, and they've told me one of them was having seizures every week when she started the trial. She's not had a seizure now for 18 months. And the second one daughter has suddenly become more aware and keeping eye contact with her parents and her friends and things like that, and actually saying words again that she hasn't said since she was sort of 2 years old. So they're absolutely delighted that they're still on it. And I think with CBD, I think that was in the next couple of years, I think that will start being prescribed for Rett syndrome, because they've seen that it works. And it wasn't the fact that it wasn't working that they cancelled this trial. They just, I think, you know, with anything in business, it comes down to finance, and the fact that they couldn't continue and get people into the trial sites, it just they just ran out of money, which is a shame. But we just wouldn't handle what happened with Sarizitan. We just wouldn't accept that again, because it was awful having to withdraw immediately from that day and start that withdrawal process. And like Hannah, Amber doesn't live at home now. She lives in a house with some other people, and we couldn't even see her to sort of explain it to her. And we were relying on the carers at the house to try and take her through that process, which was heartbreaking. And, you know, I don't want this bite-sized session to become sort of a really negative one, because there was, as we've already heard, there was so much positive things happened from that trial. But Amber's breathing is terrible. It's back to where it was before the trial. And a few weeks ago, they discovered that her swallow is not safe again. And she's had to come off all the foods that she could eat after being on Sarizitan, you know, things like bananas and things, you know, like crisps and stuff like that. She's back to pureed food and blended food, which is just heartbreaking after seeing her the way she was on Sarizitan. But it's hard, but you've just, from a parent, it's devastating, but from a professional point of view, you've just got to sort of accept that this is the nature of science and the nature of clinical trials, and these things are going to happen. And every time that this happens, they're learning something, and it's going to make it, you know, more likely that in the future there's going to be treatments. And don't like saying the cure word, but you just never know with gene therapy. We've seen it with other diseases, the improvements. You know, who wouldn't want to be involved in that? Even if I didn't want to be involved in it, and I'm sure you all feel the same, I'm sure the girls and the boys would want to be involved in it, because they're the ones living it. Our lives are made awkward, and it's heartbreaking to see people suffering, your children suffering, but they're actually living it. You know, they're actually involved in it daily with that battle against Rett syndrome. So to rule out clinical trials or science is just, it could never happen for me. And I know you guys feel the same. I don't think you'd be here if you didn't.
I think, Natalia, I don't know if that kind of answers the question that you've put in the chat. I think the answer is you just have to. But I think maybe what Andy's saying is that if that were to be the situation again, certainly we would try to be handling it slightly differently so that maybe that didn't actually happen. But Natalia's asked, how do you handle the withdrawal of medication, especially after such good benefits to your daughters? Maybe if one of you could just try to answer. I mean, it's a difficult question. Jane?
We were given an extra day's grace. We were allowed to give one more dose of the medication. That was, you know, it didn't feel like very much in light of what it was. But it sort of ties in with what I was going to say. We talked about sort of clinical benefits. We had an unexpected clinical benefit with Sarizitan. Obviously with Rett girls, all of their voluntary motor function is affected, and that includes facial expression. And what we found with Emily on Sarizitan was she suddenly had expressions. We instead of the sort of the very flat face, unless I don't know whether other girls are exactly the same, but unless Emily is over delighted, absolutely beside herself, she doesn't look particularly impressed with much. But suddenly we had these little quirky smiles and twinkles, and her face came to life on Sarizitan, which was amazing. And to watch that go when we stopped the Sarizitan was really very sad. And I don't know how much Emily was aware of how she wasn't as expressive, but of course it affects how, especially people who don't know her well, interact with her, because they don't see the response that you expect in conversation with somebody, and so they assume a level of intelligence that is not what Emily has. And so handling the withdrawal, when Emily knew what was going on, Emily did understand that it was stopping, but just like us, did not understand why or how this could be. It was very tricky, and we had a miserable few days. The actual physical withdrawal wasn't particularly difficult, in the sense that other than returning to the breath holding that had been the case, and it surprisingly took quite a long while. We were a good few weeks down the road before we could say Emily was exactly back to where she had been, which came as a surprise, because we didn't think that it lasted very long in Emily's system. But apart from that gradual return to, there were no physical real effects or harmful sort of side effects of withdrawing the medication. We didn't have that problem. But the emotional effect of this is no longer an option to us was a tricky one to maneuver, and I don't really know that we did it particularly well, because we couldn't give any answers. But yeah, the unexpected benefits, of course, then mean if that has to stop, mean that you lose those too.
I mean, a couple of positive things that came out of it was Amber, because she'd been under Santosh for so long, he gave her a prescription of buspirone, which had never worked in the past, but mixed with an anti-anxiety med, which for a while helped. It really helped. She wasn't as good as she was on Sarizatam, but she could still eat properly and everything else. But the overriding feeling I have, it's a bit like that film Awakenings, where the guy in it, I think it was De Niro, had that period of time where he could suddenly see the world and get out and all the rest of it and express himself. And I just think for those few years that Amber was on that drug, she had a totally different experience to what she was having before that. Sadly, it hasn't, she's not on it now, but she's still in the main quite a happy person. And a bit of me just hopes that she thinks back to those times when she could eat anything she wanted in vast quantities, and feel happy about that. That's my hope. And no matter how it turned out, I still don't regret her being on it.
What I was going to lead on from what Jane was saying was really to go back to all of you and say, given you've talked about really positive outcomes, but then obviously the real disappointment of that not continuing, on reflection, in retrospect, what would you say to other parents? What would you say to other people who are thinking about a clinical trial? Obviously it's not a particular one. What's your overall reflection, having come out the other side? Obviously it's not the outcome you wanted, but there are positives. So what advice would you give to parents who are maybe thinking about embarking on clinical trials? Zilla? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I would definitely do it again. I would, like I did with the Zarazotin one, I would look into it. Obviously, I would feel confident if it was under Professor Santosh. If it isn't under Professor Santosh, I would want to do exactly the same, meet the team, ask all the questions, look at the safety of the drug, and how they're monitoring. I think for me, the high monitoring we had from the team, we used to get phone calls every 2 or 3 days. How is she? That to me, they were keeping her safe, and that's what I would be asking, exactly the same questions. But I would 110%, I would go for it again. In fact, I have asked, please put Hannah forward for any trial. So yeah, positive. Okay, it wasn't a positive ending, but there was a positive spin because it was the first trial, and now we're going to get a second, a third, a fourth. And there's a group of parents, group of girls that have gone through it, and that's why we're here to say, okay, it wasn't a good ending, but the journey was positive. So 100% I would go for a trial. Definitely.
Very good. Melise or Jane, anything to add?
Nothing much to add. Exact same as Zilla, actually. Feel the exact same way. Yeah, we would definitely go for another trial. Again, if it was Professor Santosh and the team, we would have absolutely no, questions or anything, because we know how they work. But yeah, if it was another team, then yeah, obviously it's kind of that start at the beginning in a way, but you've got that bit of experience behind you. But yeah, again, obviously wasn't a great ending to that one. But as you say, obviously not every treatment can be taken right through. But yeah, we would definitely go again.
Good to hear. Jane, so I'm guessing you're going to say something quite similar.
I am. Yeah, we had several years of life better than it would have been otherwise, and that's kind of why we went into it. You're left in no doubt. The amount of times you sign something that says that that this could end at any time, and that'll be the end of it, you do go into it with your eyes open, and we did. So we can't complain that is the ending that happened. But what we did when we went into it was we weighed up what the potential benefit could be, and perhaps we didn't reach the full extent of the potential, but we still got benefits. And not to mention, that's only personally, not to mention the benefit to the wider Rett community of all the information that was gathered. And it didn't all go to waste. Professor Santosh, really on the back of and in conjunction with this trial, has now got an incredible service for our girls and others, and we're all benefiting from that. So it's still a win, not the win we maybe were hoping for, but it's still a win.
I'll just add something in there. Professor Santosh actually kept his own data from that trial, separate to Neuron, and he's using that data to implement change ongoing. So I don't think there's, from that point of view, there were so many things that people don't first of all think about, that the benefits from it. I can also, and it might be useful to watch yesterday's Bitesize when I went into more detail, but the next trial that's starting is the Anavex Children's Trial. The Anavex Adults Trial is ongoing, only at 2 sites. This is going to be a bigger trial. But we've met all the other doctors, mainly by Zoom because of lockdown, but Dr. Shetty at Edinburgh, Dr. Martin at Nottingham, Dr. Banker in Manchester, and Dr. Kumar, who did CBD at Alder Hey, who we've met in person as well and visited. We've got no qualms with working with them. If we had any issues, we wouldn't, to be honest. So I think for all of you who are already under Santosh, you'd prefer to go there, but London is the clinic that is always going to be the most oversubscribed. So some of the other ones. The other good thing about it is those doctors are also talking to Santosh and learning from him. They've got a little group. Rachel and I introduced them to each other, so they've got their own little group going now where they're actually in contact, which is quite rare. In collaboration in the medical world isn't always the best. So to have that situation is good. They sort of, I think, in some ways, some of them look up to him as a bit of a mentor. So they all know what they're doing, and now gene therapy, with it being such a pioneering, thing to do, that's a different matter altogether.
That's a different bite-size, Andy. Don't start that.
Okay, I'm stopping.
Here all day. No, that is a different bite size, and obviously it's something that we are all hoping for. We've got all our hopes invested in that. But I think thank you for making that point, Jane, about the wider community and the benefits of all of your participation has benefited every other family as we move forward. And Professor Santosh will be doing a bite size next Friday on that topic of how participating does benefit the wider community. I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to throw in, I think, because we've heard from all three of you had such positive outcomes, I'm just going to quickly throw in our own experience, because it's a completely different experience and outcome that might be useful to other parents to hear. So I will do it in a very quick summary. Our daughter Hannah was also on the Cerizitan trial. Pretty sure she was on the placebo for the first few weeks, months, was it? And when she was then on the open label, after the first dose, when they were monitoring her, as they do very closely, her heart rate had shot up and she was reacting not very well. And they were on it. They took her straight off. There were no further dose. She was just off the trial immediately, which seemed like a fail. It's like, oh, well, that was all a complete waste of time. We'd gone through the whole placebo. We'd done all these trips into London. We're like, well, what was that for? It was a waste of time. But it actually was a really, really positive thing to happen, because what they identified through that was that what had happened to her was Cerizitan was interacting mainly when she was breath holding, and it was exacerbating her QT intervals. And they then did a whole load more ECGs, and they looked through all her previous ECGs and said, actually, she's borderline long QT syndrome, which was a diagnosis we'd not ever had before. No one had looked into it. And suddenly that meant, it feels like, well, God, we've got another diagnosis. That's terrible. This isn't something we want. But actually, potentially life-saving for her, because we suddenly had an A4 sheet of loads of very common medications that she shouldn't ever have, because they might interact with long QT and cause cardiac arrest. And no one had ever mentioned that to us before. No one had thought that this, children with Rett syndrome are prone to long QT. Let's check. And so now there are common antibiotics, common medications that we might otherwise have given her that now we know she absolutely can't have. So that was really beneficial. No, Cerizitan didn't work out, but we ended up with information that's really critical to her well-being. And as you've all said, we also ended up under the care of Professor Santosh and the team. They didn't just discharge her. They didn't say, oh, look, the trial hasn't worked, off you go. They did all that follow-up investigation, and they now monitor her regularly. They've got her on different medication to keep the QT syndrome under control. So actually, we went in hoping for one outcome. We didn't get that, but we did get outcomes that have been really beneficial. And I think that that's something that we had no idea that was possible. When you go into the clinical trial, you've got one outcome in your head. I think it's maybe useful for parents to realise that's not the only potential possible positive to come out of this. So I just wanted to throw that in as a kind of counteract of the drug working. Even if it doesn't work, it's not necessarily been a waste of time.
And I've got one more little thing to say about that. We, another positive about attending a clinical trial, if you're not getting much help from your local services. I had a parent whose son wanted to go on. She wanted her son to go on the trial, and we did the pre-screening, and he went, and unfortunately his breath holding wasn't bad enough. So I rang her afterwards and just said, I'm really sorry that happened. And she said, don't worry about it. We didn't think it was, but we just wanted to get him in front of Santosh. We were desperate. And he's been referred, but they couldn't get funding. So it was a sneaky way of doing it. But Rett parents are nothing if not resilient. And fair play to her.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to quickly go back to Natalia's asked, is anyone currently on the Anavex trial? I'm going to give that to you, Andy. It's your field. Okay,
the Anavex trial, in the adults, there's 5 patients at Manchester and London. They don't expect to be recruiting anymore.
Adults.
It's a funny trial because there's a Rett syndrome questionnaire that you have to score on and get points on. So the first few, with the Manchester trial, the first few patients failed. And I think it's because as parents, we want to talk about how great our kids are rather than talk about how depressing and how they can't do things and how they, you know, all the rest of it, all the other symptoms. So what happened was the pharma company involved, Anavex, they trained me to do the questionnaire. And they'd all been getting, Kings as well, they had to get over 40. And they were getting a lot of people who were on like 38, 39, and then people who were just passing at 42, 43. And I've only done one, and I'm hoping I'll be doing more for the children's trial. But the one family I did, they got a score of 70. And I'm like, I know these families that have failed this trial. How has that happened? You know, because I don't think there's any of them that should have failed it. And it's the way you ask questions. If you've got a clinician asking a question, they're just like a robot. But there was the one that I did, the mum said and this woman was nearly 50, by the way. And the mum said on one question, no, she doesn't damage herself with her hands by hand wringing, and she doesn't have bruises or anything like that. And I just stopped her and said, a few minutes ago, you were talking about feeding time and how sometimes she gets a hand stuck under the table and she starts banging the table with her hands, and she's even had her knuckles bleed. So a score that would have been 0 if a clinician had asked suddenly became a 3. So hopefully I'll be doing that for when we go to the children's trial. Rachel's getting trained on it as well, because there's going to be a lot of patients. So it's just a case of learning all these things all the time. But moving on, the children's trial is imminent. It's hopefully going to start at Manchester and King's first. They're looking at early November.
And what age would you?
5 to 17. And then Nottingham and Edinburgh and possibly another London site will be announced a little bit later on. So they're looking for about 30 patients, I think, in the UK. So an expressions of interest email will go out to the people on the registry probably early next week, just asking for a yes or no. And then when we get a start date, I'll start to contact people and arrange phone calls. Hopefully it will be a phone call where I explain the criteria and what we do as an organisation to help, but also, fingers crossed, it'll be also, can you do the questionnaire at the same time, which takes a little bit longer. But that's down to each individual site. Some sites will probably want to do it through the trial coordinator. Other sites will be happy for us to do it and take some burden off them. So that's where we stand at the moment with that. And this drug for children has already been tried in Australia, and it's had some good feedback from families. So hopefully it'll be the same here.
Okay.
But there are more trials. I'm not saying anything that's not public knowledge. There are more trials on the horizon, including gene therapy, but there are others as well. You know, it's a bit like buses. One goes and then
something about some stem cell, which I've actually not read anywhere about.
I've not heard anything about that.
No, okay.
Yeah.
There's so much out there, and there's so many different places to get your information. It's hard to know what's actually correct and what's not.
Yeah, well, that's
very
the
difficult.
thing.
Go to clinicaltrials.gov is the best website to go to check out all the criteria and what the trials, hopefully the outcome measures from the trials.
And just to double check, the children can participate in more than one trial, right? Because somehow it came up in some circles.
Yeah, as long as there's a reasonable gap in between the two. It's not something you can just switch over.
So it won't be that she's already been on the trial. We won't even sort of ask.
No, that's not the case. With the Anavex trial, for example, you have to have stable medication for 30 days prior to start of the trial, and that's it. So whether you've been on another clinical trial a year earlier is irrelevant, really.
And if my daughter is 5 in beginning of November, will she still be sort of within the age range?
Yeah, Yeah, because she's not going to be starting. If she got on, she wouldn't be starting until she was 5. So anyone that's within a few months, we will be emailing. So there'll be some people who get emailed whose children are only 4, but if they're going to turn 5 quite soon, and the trials are usually staggered. So you get a couple of patients in the first month, then another couple of patients the second month, and so on. So we've even had it where patients have held back because they're going on holiday or whatever. So we can those sort of things can all be arranged and sorted out.
Okay, I am very conscious that we've
Just look out for that email, Natalia.
Very conscious that we're over time. I do have one more question, but that came from Lisa, who couldn't join, but she emailed me in. But I'm actually not sure that she's asked any parents who have taken children to hospital for clinical trials during COVID, how safe they felt this was. I'm not sure that's relevant because there weren't any clinical trials running.
No, there was people going to Alder Hey throughout COVID, and a couple of them were quite scared, but they were reassured as soon as he went. It was no problem whatsoever. Everything was fine.
Yeah,
so that was at Alder Hey.
I think insofar as any of us have continued taking children to hospital appointments, it's felt scary until you get there, and then it's actually felt not quite so bad. That's how I've felt anyway.
The other thing to mention is some of the clinical trial facilities are separate to the hospital. Manchester's is, for example, so you don't go anywhere near the hospital. Yeah. You don't have to walk through it even. It's a completely separate building, and there's a car park right next door to it. Okay. Because me and Rachel went on the vaccine trial there just to see what the facility was like to save us a job in the future. So we were reassured by going on that trial and finding out that everything was good.
And I mean, King's feels very separate. You really don't have to walk through the hospital at all, do you?
Yeah, there's a separate entrance, isn't there, at the back when you know where you're going?
Yeah. So I think that's reassuring. Okay, I think we should wrap up because we've gone over. Zilla, Melise, and Jane, thank you so much for sharing your experiences today. I think that's been very, very helpful and positive, despite your disappointment and not being able to continue. I think you've still had experiences that are going to be really helpful to other parents. Thank you for those of you who have joined us today. And I will just add again that, well, first of all, there'll be an email coming out shortly with a feedback survey that if you're watching, be great if you could just fill it in. It only takes about 90 seconds. And also we have got Professor Santosh next Friday at 2:00, who will be talking about having all of us participate in clinical research, what it's like to be micromanaged, and everything he learned from you guys that is now going into research, which is really valuable. So that's worth signing up to. And then also keep your eye on our social media for October's sessions, which will be on nutrition, including blended diet, anxiety and depression, and transition, a nice big topic, which we're all excited about. So thank you everybody for listening, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. And